Go ahead and start recording. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Vahe. So again, I'll reintroduce because of the recording. Vahe is a peace building policy officer at Peace Direct and co-chair of the US YPS coalition. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Vahe, to introduce a little bit of what is YPS and the social media toolkit. So over to you.
Thank you, Katrina. So some of you may know the YPS, UN Security Council Resolution 2250, supports the youth, peace, and security agenda, which really look to empower young people around the world as far as being active agents for positive change, particularly that a lot of the global world is, especially in the developing countries and plagued with conflict-affected countries, are young people, an overwhelming majority. For example, in Africa, as well as in Latin America and in parts of Asia, are young people who do not have a voice within their circumstances or having a say in what they want to see in as far as peace and security within their own country. So what the UN Security Council resolution sought to do is really empower them and provide them the space and resources that they need to be, positive agents for positive change. And this, in its fifth year, we have seen two other resolutions passed, one this past year and one a couple of years ago, really seeking to improve and socialize as well as institutionalize the YPS agenda within the United Nations. And right now, what we are trying to do here with this social media toolkit sorry, housemates are cooking. So, but right now, what we're trying to do with the social media toolkit is kind of create a global campaign to help socialize and continue to spread the youth, peace, and security message and continue to empower young people around the world, especially during times of COVID-19, where a lot of closing civic space and attacks against young people who are really trying to engage, politically as far as and peace building within their country and seeing a positive future, what they want to see and have a say in what they into a future they want to see. And right now within the social media toolkit, what we've created here, if Katrina, you can move on to the next slide, is with the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace, and Security, which is really an entire campaign of youth and civil society as well as UN organizations that are contributed to the passage of UN Security Council Resolution 2250, as well as the following resolutions that have happened as well, and continue to advocate member states of the UN to, implement the UN YPS agenda within their own country basis, which we'll get into. Mina will talk about more about what the US YPS coalition is up to. Katrina, if you move on to the next slide as well. So what we've created with the social media toolkit is some hashtags that we can use. The primary hashtag being hashtag youth for peace, and then secondary hashtags that can also be used to really create a global campaign. We created some photo frames for a lot of the youth-led organizations and young people, or NGOs and civil society who really advocate and work with young people around the world to use to showcase the work that they are doing. And highlight the work that youth are doing, primarily across the world. What we have seen as far as climate change is concerned, racial justice here in the United States and elsewhere around the world, young people are really leading the movements for change. So this is something that we want to, capitalize on and showcase that youth are not a problem that needs solving, but in fact are agents that need to be used to, act on positive change and fix a lot of the wrongs that have been done in the past. And we also have some suggested messages and data points that we have created, which we'll show you later on. This is really just to help people, spark an idea of what to write about, but also for those youth organizations or youth peace builders who do not have the capacity or the time to really come up with their own campaign. So we've helped by creating the social media toolkit to help inspire those or just use key messages that are already made. Within that, we want you to share and use these posts on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, whatever social media is out there, and all of them to really showcase youth, peace, and security. And a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from youth around the world is that the youth peace and security agenda is too Anglophone. So with this social media toolkit, we've really put in the effort to produce it in English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. In this way, making it a little bit more inclusive and holistic in understanding, because the criticism that we got from it is in making any of the YPS agenda more than just English helps branch out and reach communities and reach potential allies that we would not have reached otherwise if they were not, educated enough or do not speak English as their first language. So this is an opportunity to continue spreading and making the YPS agenda more inclusive, as that's what we want it to be. Katrina, if you could go to the next slide. So this is a great template as far as how to kind of create a YPS anniversary post, which is, reminder, December 9th. But we're really celebrating it all throughout this month. So what you'll do is select a hashtag that you want to use. If you want to put in an image, select a photo frame to go with your post. If it's anything in particular, we are working off of the 5 pillars of YPS, plus additional intersectionality of gender and youth, as well as COVID-19, and select in the messages that we have there, or come up with one of your own and showcase what youth are doing around in your area and your parts as well. And then just share it, and we can use that and track it. And hopefully this will garner enough support around the world, really. Katrina, if you go to the next slide, please. So these are some of the platforms that you can use as well. I am going to add one in the chat right now. This is where a lot of you can find the social media toolkits, as well as posting events, as well as participating. This is really the Youth Peace and Security, the Global Coalition's Youth Peace and Security communication hub, where you can find events, as well as the social media toolkits in all of the languages that I've mentioned already, as well as the members who are a part of it. Katrina, could you go to the next slide, please? Great, so this is what, just a couple of examples of what it could potentially look like if you were to create it. And mind you, images are highly encouraged, videos are highly encouraged, but really the text is really the main thing that anyone and everyone needs to kind of be focusing on as well. You don't necessarily need to share images if you do not feel comfortable, same with videos, but we highly encourage it, as we want to really showcase what youth are really doing as far as in the youth peace and security arena. Katrina, could you move on to the next slide? And you'll see the hashtags, as I mentioned. This is really helpful for us to continue tracking a lot of the messages on social media and different mediums as well. Katrina, if you go to the next slide, you'll see here are the primary hashtags and secondary hashtags. And between the two, the primary hashtag, hashtag Youth for Peace, is one that we are using mainly to track a lot of the work that's happening. The secondary hashtags are also stuff that we are tracking, but we would prefer if people use the hashtag Youth for Peace, which is one that has been used throughout the 5 years of the UN Security Council 2250. So, Katrina, if you could, here are some example photo frames, if you can move on. It's just gonna be a lot of photo frames. Once you download the social media toolkit, you'll see all this, and you can just take it. It's in the PowerPoint version, so you can grab that and just download it and put it into the social media post itself. And here are some example posts and messages that I spoke to you about, that if you do not have the time or do not have like an idea of what to post, this is something you can just copy paste and use, or you can even use it as inspiration to post on social media. So we have some general messages about YPS, some fun facts, population, what UN Security Council resolution is, when it passed. Katrina, if you could move on to the next one as well. And here we have participation, which is one of the YPS pillars that is looking to advocate for. Again, some example messaging, what it is, what it's about. Katrina, move on. Protection, another one, same thing. Just use it for inspiration, or you can just grab from it and keep copy pasting into it. Um, keep going. I think we're nearing the end. Here's the intersection. Here's stuff, the COVID and the intersection of gender and youth is not on the YPS pillars, but two things that we found very important to put as far as what young people are doing and the intersection of the women peace and security, because more often than not, youth peace and security is thought of being only young men, not young women. And that's something that we really want to highlight with the intersectionality, is that young men, women, and other genders as well. This needs to be inclusive for all young people, as throughout life, everyone enters the phase of being youth. So here are some ready-made quote cards as well that, again, when you download the PowerPoint for the social media toolkit, you can get these and just use this as the image that you post onto the social media medium that you do decide to share with. So, and I think that should cover the social media toolkit itself. With that, I can hand it over to Anisha.
Thank you so much, Vahe, for going through that with us. I'm going to hand it over now to our resident expert, Anisha Philippa Lemming, our communication specialist from the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism. And Anisha is going to talk to us a little bit more about how to enhance our online advocacy, both within the anniversary and just generally. So over to you, Anisha.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to wait for the presentation to come on. Yeah, great. So, not an expert here, but like I'll still try to do my bit of just sort of emphasizing on why is visual storytelling important, and how can we make our digital campaigns much more sort of effective, like in terms of reach, and like in terms of audience engagement, etc. So yeah, just like I hope this is helpful. Moving on to the first slide, is like of course, but when we speak about digital campaigning, especially online advocacy in today's date, there is nothing more sort of out there and more impactful than visual storytelling. The visual storytelling, in a way, is like, I'm sure all the comms people here would know it, but for the non-comsy people, it's more like how we create pages of content into like a visual appealing product. Like it could be in the form of an infographic or a flyer, or just turning like some fantastic data in your programs into, say, some really driven visual content. Why is it important? Like, it's important because if you see, like, you know, if we also, for example, if you see something, I mean, the visuals stay longer with us than like pages of text, etc. But when we speak about storytelling, and especially storytelling for the youth and programs, there is an enormous potential in the way we could communicate, like in the sense, and like in especially new age communications for the youth in particular. It could be like social media is in a high, but like, you know, in the sense of Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc. There's just so much proactive mediums out there to turn all the sort of programmatic content into the visual aspect of storytelling. That would also mean that while we do that, it's important to also take visual storytelling to hold key aspects when we try to sort of tell a story visually through infographics or memes, or it could be just putting like a few like images of the program together, etc. But it's also important to identify the mediums that we are going to communicate. I mean, of course, and the objective of the visual storytelling in itself, and of course the strategy that goes with it. I mean, and I think these three are the key aspects of storytelling in general, and not just visual storytelling when you're at it. But when we speak about how can we, like for all the people who are thinking, how can we also like incorporate more visual storytelling in our content on an everyday thing? I mean, it's as simple as like if you can see tips for engaging content, it's to add more images to your content, and of course data turning into like a snap of like an infographic is a big win-win. Like of course there's nothing more impactful than a series of photo stories to really reflect what your program's all about than just like a report or something that is just like a brochure or a textbook. So, I mean, definitely the visuals versus text, visuals are something that can be used in an enormous way to not only gauge like audience engagement for the programs, but also make sure that there is much more resonance from the audience to the agenda that you're driving in your programs. So that's a bit about the visual storytelling and how can we work towards it. Moving on to the next bit, we speak about multimedia tools. There are a lot of tools out there, especially now when we speak about, you know, like just graphic designing or just putting it out there. So I've listed a few online tools that can help you really sort of work towards it. I'm sure a lot of you may already be aware of it. I mean, like it's just up there. But these are the things if one needs to work on, like in terms of an online graphic design platform, these are really effective in terms of creating like online communiques for your organization, starting from like just it could be brand designing, it could be newsletters, or it could be just like quotes and flyers, etc. So like I've also listed a few tips for the designing, like as an extra, say like how branding is important, and it's important to also keep up to make sure that like your objective to your like how can you turn your messaging more like as an impactful way through these graphic design tools. Moving on, we have from the imagery we move on to the next one, which is more of the online video editing tools, which also are very effective in terms of I'd say, I mean, I've listed these because I've personally used them. They're pretty easy to use. Also, the fact that they're pretty, like they have a very friendly interface. So in terms of for beginners or like, you know, to just sort of put things together and like very easy editing options as well. It's also very important to, I mean, just have like a method to madness when you talk about storytelling and when you sort of put these visuals together, be it in the form of images or video. So I've also sort of tried to lay out in terms of what to consider while you are sort of on the like, you know, while you're on your way to edit a video. Like it's important to keep in mind, like there has to be like sort of emphasizing on key messages, and also to make sure like an online video, the duration is key, like especially for social media. Like I'm sure all the comms people in-house would agree with me, but like it's important to also make sure that we have a very sort of set guideline and a set thing, even in that means in-house when we are editing the videos, to just also maintain a sort of uniformity in terms of your messaging. Moving on, then we have certain things, like some amazing, in fact, like some amazing sort of outlets for royalty-free images. I mean, that's something that is a go-to thing in terms of when you're designing collaterals, and that really comes hand in hand to make sure that like we do get some great images. These four are definitely places where we can get very human interest driven images, to be specific to the YPS agenda and what we're looking at and images, etc. These four can, I mean, have, and like they really do provide sort of like royalty-free images that are going to use for everything, like for your video as well as for your graphic outlets as well. So this being that, I would also sort of put links to everything in the chat box to make sure that everyone has access to these sort of tools that I spoke about. But to just sort of wrap it up, it's also like to emphasize on the importance of visual storytelling and just communicating the messaging in itself. It is fairly important, like for us to also have a collaborative sense of sort of engagement as far as online engagement is concerned, but whether it is online video editing or even graphics or even just, I mean, the idea is to also have it in a form of an integrated communication, but wherein you communicate to engage and you communicate to get the partners and you get your stakeholders together. So yeah, going forward, especially the YPS agenda in itself is all about collaborative communications. And yeah, the visual storytelling is like a big win-win to get to that. So I'll stop here, but I'm happy to take questions on anything that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anisha. That was very helpful. Both you and Vahe gave us great overviews of different tools and different things that we can use to participate both in the anniversary on December 9th, but also throughout the entire month of December and eventually all year round, to make sure that our messages as youth peace builders and youth activists and YPS champions are also communicated. So now, before we open up the floor for any questions or for any feedback or comments from any of you, we'd like to first invite two of our representatives, one from the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security and one from the US YPS Coalition, to share a little bit about examples or best practices of what's been happening over the last few months in terms of communications with the coalitions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Gabriela Caribe, who is from the Canadian Coalition for YPS, and will share with us a little bit more of what's been going on in Canada. Over to you, Gambi.
Thank you so much, Katrina. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at CCYPS. So one of the most important things we do is we try to promote the concept that the YPS agenda is also a local agenda, not only international in Canada. So what we try to do is we're trying with Instagram lives with local activists talking about local agendas. So for example, we have two lives, one talking about healthy relationships with the local activists and protecting education. Also, we have initiatives such as the consultation with the Youth Secretariat for the State of Youth report, which was an amazing opportunity to engage locally in the YPS agenda. Also, we did a contribution to the consultation with Global Affairs Canada on the new feminist foreign policy. And another aspect that is really important to us in our context in Canada is the bilingual aspect. So trying to be the most as inclusive as possible. So we try to provide as much as bilingual content as possible. So for example, we will be releasing on December 9th a video that is entirely bilingual, showing our progress on what we've done so far and what we've accomplished. And also our global affairs consultation was also done entirely bilingual, both the written and video submissions. So that's something that is really important to us, so we can reach as many people as possible, because we do have quite a large francophone young population in Canada. So we want to be as inclusive as possible so they can engage in our projects and participate in the YPS agenda.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over now to Mina Ayazi from the US YPS Coalition. Please go ahead, Mina, and let us know what you've been up to in terms of promoting YPS and using communications to do so.
Sure. Thank you, Katrina. And thank you, Gabriella, for an overview of what you all do up north. I think communications has been really key for a lot of our work, especially since COVID happened. A lot of our work as a coalition really centers around the US YPS Act, which is a piece of legislation that amends US foreign policy to increase the inclusion of young people in US foreign policy efforts, and also to remove systemic barriers to their access to funding. So a lot of people don't really understand what YPS is or why we even need this bill and legislation. So a lot of our work really comes down to how we message our advocacy on Capitol Hill with members of Congress, but then also how we message our advocacy with young people in the US, because all of our advocacy is really spearheaded by young people, not really just us as professionals. And the eventual goal is to turn this into a grassroots movement of young people. So it's really learning how to communicate on the Hill in terms of having really nice professional policy briefs that are one-pagers, that are visual, that are attractive for staffers of members of Congress to read. A lot of our work happens in tagging members of Congress on social media when something exciting happens. For example, if you go to, and I'm going to put me and Vahe on the spot, not to brag about us, but I think we do this pretty well, where we'll tag members of Congress directly and be like, hey, at Representative Grace Mang, like, this is why you should support the YPS Act. We've put out multiple social media toolkits that have ready to share posts and graphics for young people to just copy and paste into their accounts to make advocacy easier. We launched a webinar series, the hashtag Yes for YPS webinar series, which one of the events which we co-hosted with you all back in late October, early November, if I'm not mistaken, which has been really instrumental in socializing the YPS agenda as well. Getting young people from around the world to come together and talk about various issues facing young people, young activists that are related to the YPS agenda, to really show people what YPS is all about, and to create a dialogue platform to start brainstorming how we can better socialize this and also raise awareness of really important issues. We're looking forward to continuing to use social media and webinar platforms, especially right now, as a way to push advocacy for the YPS Act, and to also build the larger movement of young people mobilizing to change US foreign policy, and to really understand what peace building is and use peace building in our day-to-day. Hope that is a good overview, and do let us know if you have any questions. And we're also happy to share any of the materials that we've created and used in our advocacy.
Thank you so much. Extremely helpful to hear from both of you on some examples of what's worked and what you've been doing and what you've been up to in terms of promoting YPS, because it's so true that, at least in our North American context, a lot of people don't relate to YPS or don't see it as a domestic issue. The other thing that really struck me when you were both speaking was the nature or the importance of partnerships. And this is just as important in communications work, but also within the overall YPS agenda. I like to say that the YPS agenda is a partnerships agenda, because without partnerships, we can't achieve the agenda in itself. And it's its own pillar as well. And so I'm wondering, to kick us off, I guess, on the conversation, if anyone wants to speak a little bit more about the partnerships that you've explored or that you've successfully kind of done different things with. I know, Mina, you mentioned the partnership with the Canadian Coalition for one of the events for the webinar series, but are there any other examples or anything else anyone wants to talk about in terms of partnerships? And in the meantime, anyone of our audience, make sure you're percolating your questions, because this is the perfect time to ask both Anisha or Vahe or myself or Amina or Gabby or anyone else. This is really to exchange with each other and kind of strategize.
I guess I could take the initial question of like partnerships. I mean, Mina mentioned a lot of it as far as with the hashtag Yes for YPS webinar series, reaching out to a lot of other organizations, youth-led or otherwise, just like supporting YPS. And I think this is really big point, because, you know, within the, you know, YPS agenda, youth cannot go at it alone. We will need some allies that are, you know, older than us, and some allies who are younger than us as well. It is something that needs to be done in a very inclusive manner. I don't think the YPS agenda is trying to necessarily, you know, hijack any sort of campaign or, you know, policy thing. It is to include youth voices, because at the end of the day, young people are, especially here in the United States, I think more recently, the population here, the demographic is now majority is millennial or younger. And it's something that, we do not see very much representation within our policy frameworks, whether it's in Congress or otherwise in leadership. It's something that it is very necessary. If we are the majority of the population, it is something of a voice. And, it's drastically much so. And Mina can speak on this better than I can. But in, for example, Afghanistan, an overwhelming majority of the population is below the age of like 22. And, in Central African Republic, the average age of the entire country is 17. And this is something you don't see with, as far as within their leadership of who makes these policy changes are not young people. And this is where I think partnerships are very key and very instrumental, is really, coming in together and realizing that youth are not just like something that can be scapegoated or something that are very naive individuals. Young people are, seeking to be mentored, seeking to learn and grow themselves. But at the end of the day, they have tangible experiences and have perspectives that can be inputted into policy that can better the community, society, country, and eventually the world itself. But I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Vahe. Anyone else want to jump on that, on the question of partnerships?
To kind of piggyback off Vahe super quickly, one thing that's been really interesting, and I think that both of our coalitions have done this well, is partnering either Canadian and American organizations with global organizations and kind of taking this like reverse learning approach to YPS in the Americas. And I think that's really interesting. And I think we need to amp that up a little bit more, because not only does it make our work stronger domestically, but it really tackles the issues of Western exceptionalism and white supremacy that live in the center of international affairs, right? Like, we're finally taking a step back and being like, okay, we're not perfect. We don't know exactly what we're doing. And we're going to take a humble step back and really let you all teach us what's needed to be done to make this happen. And I'd love to see us all continue to make those partnerships and that message even stronger in the work we do.
That's very important and great that you're raising it. It actually goes really well with the question that was prompted to me when Vahe was speaking. And it's about, how do we go outside of our echo chamber, or how do we go outside of, the typical people who show up or the typical people we usually partner with? And I guess this question is also to all of you, but I'm really hoping that, Anisha, you'll have some sort of tips for us, perhaps, on how we can reach, especially with the use of social media and perhaps even the toolkit, others who are not typically within the YPS world, or within at least our version of the YPS world.
Yeah, I honestly have more of an outside perspective because I'm quite like a month old into the whole global coalition thing. So I definitely have like a very outside perspective. But speaking about how I see it and what I've learned so far, and like I said, I mean, it is all about partnerships and all about coming together. So and the only way that can happen, I mean, being a comms person, I could say, is just getting the threads together by just sort of like echoing the same message, like also sort of like have a unified sort of message, not only with the YPS agenda, but even otherwise, to just sort of have a more collaborative sort of an approach for the stakeholders who are not necessarily within, a part of the coalition. But because I think somewhere it's also about like what's next, like how do we take the entire vision into a much more larger consortium of people, so not just sort of being restricted just to the global coalition stakeholders part of it, but also to have it in a way that like to just also amplify it and just have more voices sort of pulling in together to echo the same message that the YPS has. And especially with the toolkit that Vahe has put together, even otherwise, like if you actually run it through a practical norm in social media, it does have the potential to drive like engagement up. outside of the global coalition as well. I mean, the only key word here is consistency, perhaps. Like, just consistency is key. It is a very understated word, but it goes a long, long way. So that's something, yeah, that's just like my little bit of take to it. Yeah.
Thank you, Anisha. Anyone else, either to piggyback off of this, respond somewhat to how we can expand our reach and interact with others, or at least reach others, or a question or a comment that you have in terms of the work that you do or work that you're looking to do?
Yeah, if I may jump
Go ahead,
in.
Molly.
It's more of a comment, but I guess just with my experience in the women, peace, and security space, I think an issue that we've seen is we have all these conferences and meetings with people who are already on board, and that's great. And we can brainstorm and come up with ideas and speak about everything. But I think what the problem is how do we bring that message to people who aren't on board yet? And that's why we're still where we are today at 20 years on since UN Resolution 1325. And I think the same thing is probably happening with the YPS is, we're in this, and it's exactly what you said, we're in this echo chamber of everyone's on board, but how do we use our messaging to get people who aren't on board to be on board, and without being like too aggressive or without turning people off, but without being too too passive, I think that's a hard, or I just don't have that experience to know how to do that. But I think that would be something that's worth exploring on how to get people on board who aren't necessarily on board.
Any thoughts or feedback on that?
If I could jump on that.
Go ahead, Gabby.
So for me, I totally agree with Molly. Is like we are constantly seeing people who agree with us, and it's great. We're brainstorming, we're trying to find new ideas, but I feel like something that has been happening with social media that we haven't really started talking about is we are kind of isolating ourselves with groups that agree with us. And the same happens with people who are not on board with what we're doing. So what happens is sometimes when we encounter people that are very against, I would say, what we're doing or have very different views from us, we sometimes just walk away. And I feel like that's very human, that it's normal. Like sometimes you encounter someone who thinks women shouldn't have a right to education. And it's very hard for you to process that and try to have a conversation with that person when you firmly believe that women should have the same rights as men. So I feel like something we should be doing is trying to have these really hard conversations. And something I talk about all the time is finding common ground with people who don't agree with us. And I feel like that's where we're going to find a way to reach these people who are not on board, is finding common ground with them and building conversations on top of that. Not just being on social media, is having the hard conversation when you see a Trump supporter, when you see someone who's totally against everything you're doing, is really going there with an open mind and not just like trying to show your opinion, is showing why you have that opinion. So I feel like that's something that we really need to work on, because I feel like our social media right now is very much focused on people who are on board and not people who are against it. And it's something that we should be thinking of changing so we can start real conversations with the people who are making conversation difficult.
Thank you, Gabriella. Did anyone want to respond to that, to those two comments, or to maybe offer some suggestions? Or Christopher, I see you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, so in conjunction with like what Molly said and Gabriella, both were great. I definitely wanted to speak with, I heard the notion of partnering with like grassroots organizations come up a lot in this conversation. And I think that's very important because it centers, whatever issue is going on in that space. as well as like just being able to be real, right? So like here in Atlanta over the summer, we know with the rioting and things that was happening, and I don't know if you all remember like the Blackout Tuesday thing that went on, where a lot of local and grassroots organizations messages were beginning to be buried by like the bigger organizations, because they wanted to be in solidarity, so they did this hashtag, but you know, in turn they pushed out a lot of vital information, and a lot of like grassroots organizers were arrested or hurt. So I do commend you all for, you know, creating your own hashtags and all these other things. So that's really great. But my thing would be like, you know, what are you all doing to partner with these grassroots organizations to kind of make sure that we're always centering their issues, and using your resources to kind of, using your platform to push your agenda through, you know, their issues.
For sure, meaningful partnerships is very important to making sure that those voices are heard, and not always the ones who have the most privilege or the biggest crowd. Did Anisha or someone else, did anyone want to respond to that? I saw a lot of nodding, so I don't know. Vahe?
Sure. I feel like, I guess I could go first. I feel like within the US YPS coalition, we've done an okay job, I think. Nothing is really perfect, and it's still all pilot until we can like finally fully figure it out. But I think we've done that within the hashtag Yes for YPS webinar series. Is really trying to break out of our own bubbles, and just outreach into other, young people to come onto this like new unique platform that gives them the space to speak about their experiences and their perspectives. And it ranged on a lot of different topics, from the intersection of YPS to WPS, as well as discussing young people's role in COVID-19. And I know we partnered as far as with the Canadian Coalition on, youth-led movements, whether it be social justice or racial justice in Canada, United States, and in Mexico, bringing, representatives from each country to speak on what they are doing there, and what is very important for each respective country. And I think that's something that we must continue to do, is like, create this platform that brings in young people to share their experiences and their perspectives of what they're seeing. Because like you said, Chris, more often than not, you have this kind of like corporate welfareship that just like is there for well-meaning, but really behind it is just this disingenuous front to make sure that the public knows that they're okay, because they're seeing like a larger market that could hinder their profits in some way for the quarterly gains or something like that. And I know like various organizations, they have their like platforms, like mine, for example, Peace Direct. We have our, Youth Action for Peace, where we work directly. It's very behind the scenes, and as much we're still very an up-and-coming organization, but we work with a lot of youth-led organizations in, Central African Republic and DR Congo, Mali, and Pakistan, where, we work with a youth-led organization in each respective country that has a wide network of other youth-led organizations or young people who are looking to start up their own initiatives for peace building, atrocity prevention, or otherwise, or other things, and providing them the grants and giving them the funding that they need, or the resources that they need to launch those initiatives. And I think that goes in line as well as what you're saying, Chris, with the language and just kind of the platform for people to speak, but also providing them the space for them to showcase what they're capable of doing and how this change can actually impact the community. And I know Mina wanted to actually come in also.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point you brought up there, Vahe. And it's something we've been trying to do a lot. I think I wanted to jump from Molly to Gabriella to Christopher's points. Molly, to your point, I come from the WPS community. I was working on WPS for about 2 years before I started entering the YPS space. My experience was when I brought up an idea to my superiors about like this cool social media campaign, or like using Snapchat, for example, to engage young people at a conference on women, peace, security. It was always, oh, that's not the audience, or like, oh, those are not the people we want to attract, or like a lot of the panel discussions we had was always women, like women talking to women, women with women, and it was always elder women reaching out to elder women. So like not only was it like disengaging younger women because of age and because of this hesitancy to adopt to these new ideas and technologies, but it was also that it was turning into a women's agenda, and it became a women's agenda. And unfortunately, we're doing the same with YPS, as young people are talking to young people, and we're doing really well in the innovation and adopting new technologies and like really getting out there and being creative. But we're also not doing the best job of engaging elder people in this. Both the YPS and WPS agendas are a people's agenda, and I think on both ends we need to start socializing it as that, right? When we have a panel discussion on women, peace, security, we need to be engaging men and talking about how men need to step up and really adopt and embrace gender equality. We need to be talking about peaceful masculinities and how the reason why men act the way they do is because they also have their problems, and toxic masculinity is also a problem that we need to tackle to ever achieve gender equality. And when it comes to ageism, same exact, why do old people or elder people think the way that they do? Well, let's sit down and talk to them. Let's have intergenerational dialogue. Let's use technologies and platforms and methods of communication that also brings them into the conversation and doesn't leave them dumbfounded when they're trying to, you know, use a Twitter poll or Instagram live, right? That they don't really know how to use. So I think that there's like a level of us also having to meet common, which Gabriella, to your point, is meet common ground with those people and really embrace and sell these agendas as a people's agenda. Chris, to your point, I think something really interesting happened. This was like, I think early fall, late summer, when the young activists in Colombia were dealing with protection issues. You know why Peacebuilders started using the hashtag Youth Lives Matter. I was chatting with one of our US YPS coalition members who's a Black Lives Matter activist, and immediately she was like, hey, this isn't okay. And we started talking about this as a coalition, like as a US coalition, like, hey, like, okay, we're a global organization, we're also a global coalition, we are all global members, and it's on us to bring these voices to the global stage so that racial justice turns into a global conversation and not just an American conversation. A lot of Black Lives Matter activists were not coming to GCYPS meetings, they're not entering the YPS space, they were not consulting with the UN Secretary General, Youth Envoy on Youth's office on protection issues. So we came together and talked to our friends over at YPS and created a dialogue about why it was not okay to use Youth Lives Matter hashtag because it undermined the Black Lives Matter movement. And we were able to create that dialogue and bring Black voices to the forefront, and bring our fellow Black Lives Matter activists to the UN Youth Envoy's office to do consultations with them on protection issues. So I think there's a lot more we can do. And I think, as Vahe mentioned, we've started the groundwork in doing that. But the first piece is actually making those connections. Like a lot of the connections we had were through our friends or through people that we knew. But it's through the people that we don't know that are important, right? The activists out in California who we're not connected to, or, out in Texas that we need to connect to. So a lot of it is also, I think, expanding our networks, and it's hard to do that during COVID, but there's a lot more that we can do to expand those networks and really bring the activists on a domestic level to the global stage to turn it into a even more global conversation.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you're talking about, having to have allies or reaching out outside, and that's a learning that we've taken, or we should be taking, from the WPS agenda. And actually, when we created and launched the Canadian Coalition for YPS, we specifically mentioned that we wanted allies, and some of our members who are members of the coalition are not young people. We are youth-led and youth-focused, and most of our members are young people, but we do still have allies and those who are not explicitly youth who are members as well. And so that's a way, I guess, for us to be able to reach outside the box and have those allyship. So we're coming to a close. We're already at 8 o'clock. So what my takeaways from this are, there are three main ones from our conversation. First is the importance of partnerships. I think it's undoubtable. All of us seem to have agreed on this. And partnerships are so crucial to making sure that youth, peace, and security is implemented and recognized as it should be. The second is about finding commonalities and allies. So finding those different commonalities to make sure that those who are not necessarily convinced or who don't think that who don't see the relevance to YPS can actually kind of relate it to their own lives and their realities and perhaps become allies as well of the agenda. And then the third is about elevating the voices from the ground. So as Chris, you mentioned, that it has to be those who are most affected and those who work on these issues day in and day out that also have the space to be able to be included and to have be amplified or uplifted to participate fully in these dialogues and in this common peace agenda for all of us. And so on behalf of the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security, our friends at the US YPS Coalition, and our friends at UNOY Peacebuilders, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this has been recorded and we will be sharing it. So if you want to go back, a huge thank you to Anisha from the UNOCT office for sharing with us some tips and tricks on how to optimize our online advocacy, and to Vahe for presenting the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security's social media toolkit. In the chat, you'll see the link that Vahe has sent about Spark Blue, which is a platform where all of this is housed. We will be sharing this on social media as well, and so please do share, do use the toolkit, and don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your evening, and happy 5th anniversary week. Bye, everyone.